So the next topic is about pins, P-I-N-S, pins. And to introduce this topic, we'll talk about the opening rules and then talk about the middle game rules as well. So in the opening, the first 12 moves is your opening. The first 12 moves is your opening, right? This is your opening game. And there are 3 rules that define what your moves should be during the opening game. The first rule is that you're supposed to control the center. You're supposed to be crazy about it. So any move you make in your first 12 moves, you have to control the center, right? And any move you make in the first 12 moves, you have to develop your pieces. And you want to protect your king by castling and doing all the good stuff. So those are your 3 beginning rules, the 3 rules for the opening. Control the center squares, develop your pieces, and protect your king, right? Now after you finish the first 12 moves, the next set of 20-ish moves, 20 odd moves, is your middle game. And in those middle games, we use what are known as tactics. There are 4 main middle game tactics: pins, skewers, discovers, and forks. Pins, skewers, discovers, and forks. There are 4 middle game tactics. We must have already looked at discovers last week in some classes. If you did, remind them what a discover is. You have a single attack discovery and a double attack discovery and all. If you have not done that, that's fine. This is where you would use, and in some other classes you may have done forks or skewers. If you've done any of the others, please spend some time to revise what those concepts are. And now we will talk about pins. Now we know what a pin does, like a push pin. You push a pin against the wall, and then you have this firm support. Can this pin move? Let's say that you pushed a pin against the wall and you hung a picture on the pin. Now will that pin move? It'd be funny if you pushed a pin under the wall and hung a nice expensive glass painting on it, and the pin moved. What would happen to the painting? It's gonna fall and break, right? So the one thing that a pin should not do is it should not move, right? Now here is an example of a pin. Let's look at the rook here. This rook wants to go there and check the king. Can the rook do that? No. The rook cannot do that because it's violating a principal rule in chess, a primary rule in chess. That rule says that at the end of your turn, your king should be safe. Right? Now we want to make sure that this rule is what you remind the kids during your introduction. During the introduction, you want to make sure that you remind all the kids about this fundamental rule in chess. The fundamental rule of chess is that at the end of your turn, your king has to be safe. You can't play a game of chess if your king is not safe and you forget that rule. Right? Of course, there's this other rule too which says you cannot touch your opponent's king to capture him. You have to check him or checkmate him. Now, the entire concept of pins is based on that one topic of chess which says that at the end of your turn, your king should be safe. Now in this case, this rook is said to be pinned. This rook cannot move because if you move the king, if you move the rook, it results in an illegal board placement. So at the end of your turn, your king would not be safe. So that rook is pinned. And you want to develop these pins, because when you develop a pin, you're essentially rendering that piece useless. Now let's switch gears a little. Now, okay, let's say that we go like this somewhere. And it is the white's turn to move. The white decides to check the king. The whites have decided to check the king. Okay. And what do we do in a check? we do CPR. We capture the checking piece, which we cannot. If we cannot capture the checking piece, we protect by blocking. And if you can't protect by blocking, that's when you run away. Now, when you protect it by blocking, you pinned him, because now you can't move this piece anymore. You can't move your rook anymore. But guess what? You also pinned the queen. Because now can the queen go away and give a check? No, because the queen, by doing so, is causing his king or her king to be in an illegal position. Because your white king cannot have a check at the end of his turn, right? So a pin could also pin the other piece, right? That's the next thing to do. Now, what you're trying to do in the middle game is you're trying to develop as many of these pins as you can. For example, let us say that we had a bigger piece. Let's say that we had a queen here, and I decide to pin him with this. Is that a good move? I essentially pinned the piece, and by pinning the piece, I rendered him useless. It's just like pinning on the wall. You don't want the pin to move. The pin should not move. If this pin moves, it's an illegal board position. The reason why you want to pin is because you're rendering these pieces useless, right? It's literally like pinning somebody to the ground. That's a bad example. but that's the pin, right? There are two types of pins. The first type of the pin is called an absolute pin. In an absolute pin, you cannot move this pin, period. Because moving this pin would cause an illegal board placement. But there's also a pin called a relative pin.
What pin?
A relative pin, R-E-L-A-T-I-V-E, a relative pin. Here's an example, right? Now, this pawn is itching to capture that knight. This pawn wants to capture the knight. Can the pawn capture the knight? Sure, if you want to. It's not illegal, right? The king is still safe. At the end of your turn, your king is still safe. Nothing is stopping you from capturing him. But by doing so, this bishop would actually get you there, right? So a pin where it's okay to move the piece because it's not causing any illegal board placement. But you still don't want to do it because it's pinned. It's called a relative pin. An absolute pin, an absolute pin is a pin where you just cannot move it because it's going to cause an illegal board placement. Typically because there's a king on the other end. And there's something blocking the king and protecting the king. But if it's not the king on the other end, then by all means you can. For example, let's talk about a case where the same thing was happening here, right? And was this there? And I have a rook here, like so. Okay, now it's interesting. Can I go capture this? Sure, by all means. If you capture me, I have a queen there. I still have my queen in place. See what I'm saying? So an illegal move sometimes, an absolute pin sometimes is okay. You can't move it. But in a relative pin, if you want to make a turn, you can make the turn and you can go for it. It's not prohibited. So just make sure that you know those two types of differences. Absolute pin is where you should not move it because your king is going to be in danger. Relative pin is where your king is not in danger. You may not want to move it, but some circumstances, some situations may want you to do that, and it's okay. Now, the next thing is, let's talk about point scores. In a pin, a larger point score piece is protected by a lower point score piece. Right? If you're here, this was the example we saw before. Right? So you had this larger point score piece. How many points is the queen? 9 points. I want to make sure that you want to make sure that the kids know this too, right? The larger point score piece is being protected by this tiny little piece here. And so, if you move him away, or if you move him away, the smaller point score piece is in the middle, right? That is what a pin is. In the next class, we'll talk about something called, in the next few sessions sometime, we'll talk about something called a skewer. And in a skewer, it's quite the opposite. A bigger point score piece would be in the middle. So in this case, if I give a check, and you move away, and then I capture this piece, what I just did was, I brought the bigger point score piece, because the king has the biggest point score of them all, which is like undefined right now, right? And that is in the middle, blocking the smaller point score piece, which is still bigger than this piece. So this kind of a position is called skewer. We'll learn about it in a future class. But for now, let's understand that a smaller point score piece is in the middle of the bigger, and it's blocking or shielding the bigger point score piece. Okay. The next thing is, pinned pieces can't protect. For example, let's say that there's a pawn here. In a normal game, I would not even dream about capturing this pawn. I would not even dream about that. Why? Because I'm capturing a 1-point piece and I'm losing a 5-point piece. Why would I do it? I would not. But in this particular case, the rule says the pinned pieces don't protect. So this pawn is not being protected by this pawn in the back, because the pawn in the back is actually pinned by the bishop. Your bishop is pinning the pawn, and pinned pieces don't protect. If you can figure out positions on the chessboard where there is a pinned piece protecting another piece, you should know that that other piece is not really protected. It's safe to be captured. So pinned pieces can't protect. Now, the other way of saying the same thing is, this piece is being defended by this pinned piece. So pinned pieces can't defend. Pinned pieces have only one thing to do: stay pinned. Pinned pieces have only one thing to do, that is to stay pinned. What do you do if you have a pinned piece? Get out of the pin. So in this case, I would get him out of the pin first, support him somehow, and now if he captures me there, I'm going to get you back, because this is no longer pinned. Because this guy is no longer pinned, and so I can get you there. So what do you do if you're pinned? Get out of the pin. Staying in pin is not a good thing, right? So you want to get out of a pin as fast as you can. Now let's say all you have are these both. Okay. On the other side, you have a bishop. You have a bishop. Now a rook by itself in an open board can never capture a bishop, because the bishops keep running away, right? Because you're attacking it horizontally or vertically, and this guy goes diagonally. It's very hard to capture a bishop, but the best way to capture these kinds of pieces, which are very hard to capture otherwise, is to first pin them down, right? And then let's say he's going to support him somehow, try to support him, and then you go for the capture, right? The most common thing that a kid would do when they try to capture a bishop is attack the bishop some way or the other. But there's only one effective way of attacking a bishop, and that is to pin him down first, especially in an endgame. Right? In an endgame, pins help you to capture pieces that are otherwise very difficult to attack or capture. This is an example where a bishop is so super hard to capture by a rook, because they go in different directions, right? But the best way to capture them is to actually pin them first. Okay. The other thing is to know what pieces pin and what pieces don't. Can all pieces pin? Well, can a rook pin? Yeah, the rook is just pinned, right? Can the bishop pin a piece? If there's a piece like this, guess what? You just pin the rook. So can bishops pin? Sure. What about a queen? Can a queen pin? Oh, I was going to use a queen here. It's not a queen. Can a queen pin? Oh, there's a check, so let's get it on a check. Can a queen pin? By all means, a queen can also pin. Right? Now, can a knight pin? Can a knight pin? Now, the one thing that is required for pinning is that the piece have a bazooka with it. Something that, when you know what a bazooka is, right? A bazooka is this big, huge gun that you carry on your shoulders, and it does like such a long range, it can go to the end of the world and come back at you, right? So all the other pieces have bazookas on them. They can literally attack to the end of the board. But a knight, on the other hand, does not have a bazooka. It only goes 2 steps and 1 turn. 2 steps and 1 turn. One other piece does not have a bazooka either. The pawn. And the king, the biggest piece of them all, does not have a bazooka either. Right? But a rook has a bazooka. Right? It goes, attacks the very end of it. And some kids know bazookas somehow, and some kids don't. But the kids who don't know the word bazooka, they get a laugh out of the word bazooka, and those who know, they get a laugh out of it too. So use the word bazooka and you'll have some interest in the class. Right? And if you have such words that you're using, let me know. I'll include them in my talks too. Right? So a pin can only be deployed by a piece that's carrying a bazooka. And there are only 3 bazooka pieces: a rook, a bishop, and a queen. So only those 3 bazooka pieces can deploy pins. The other pieces, they can get pinned, but they cannot pin. Right?
So you're saying these are the only ones that can capture a pin?
Those are the only ones that can actually get the other pieces into a pin. So for example,
Ones that can move indefinitely.
yes, I can, if I have 2 pieces, I have a bishop and I have a knight. A knight can attack the rook, but it can never pin him down.
Okay.
Because it will just escape off. But on the other hand, this guy can actually attack him and pin him down because the king is right behind him. Right? These are what I call point damage pieces. They damage only that one point. These are what I call a line damage pieces. They damage the entire line. Right? The other thing we have here is so let's say that I actually pinned a piece. I pinned a piece with my queen, which is in my pocket. The black queen is over there. So let's say I pinned a piece. Okay. Just by pinning the piece alone, it's not going to do me any good, right? Because when I'm pinning a piece, remember, I'm not only pinning his piece, I'm also locking down my own piece. Because if I take the piece out, I let go of the pin. So I'm literally holding on to my own piece there. Can I go capture him? No, because I'm going to die. This is a 5-point piece versus a 9-point piece. So the rule here says that always attack a pinned piece with a lower point score, with a pin that has a lower point score. So if I pin a piece, what's my next step to do? Attack the pinned piece with a lower point score piece. Right? So don't capture the pinned piece with the higher point score, because if you lose it, then it's not a good bargain. Now on the other hand, if I had a bishop over here, I could go for it. I could just go exchange it off. I could go kill the rook, because I'm getting a 5-point piece and I'm only losing my 3 points. But even here, it might actually make sense to get this guy up there, because now I'm going to lose just 1 point if I lose it at all. Right? So when you have a pinned piece, what do? You attack the pinned piece with a lower point score, with a lower point piece. Okay. If you have a pinned piece, it's not enough to just pin the piece and then relax and take it easy. You still have to get an advantage out of this pin. The advantage only comes when you have actually captured a piece, right? So you want to attack pinned piece. No, that's next. So we saw that when you're pinned, you want to get out of a pin. Right? How do you get out of a pin? Well, I'd say that to get out of any move, you always do the CPR. That's the only thing that chess has to teach you. To get out of a pin, you do CPR. Now let us say, for example, that okay, it's the blacks' turn to play. The blacks have decided to pin the rook. How do they pin the rook? By going there. Well, they did pin the rook. There's a king supporting him, right? But just like in a game, just like in a checkmate or in a check, the first thing you do is you try to capture the pinning piece. Can you capture the pinning piece? If you can, and you don't mind the capture, because in this case it's just an exchange, right? Then you've just saved yourself from pin. You've just gotten out of pin. One way to get out of pin, the first thing you should look for is to just capture the pinning piece. If you can't capture the pinning piece, this pinning piece, and let's say that you probably had, a pawn in place instead, what you could do is block the pin. Right? By blocking the pin, now you can't capture him because you would die. It's supported. That's a 1 point versus 3 points. So he would definitely not capture him. But you got your rook out of a pin. Yeah, you got him out of a pin. You've pinned that piece instead. But you still got your 5-point piece out. You should be happy. So you could get out of a pin by blocking it with another piece. Just remember that blocking will cause another piece to be pinned instead. Right? So you can't block a pin. You can't block this rook pin with another rook pin. It doesn't make sense. So if you have something like that, it doesn't make sense for you to block this pin with another pin. That doesn't make sense. But you can block it with a lower point score, like with the pawn. And the last thing you do is, if you have a pinned piece, and let's say that you have a bigger piece here. If you have a pinned piece, get out of pin, run away. And now you don't have a pin anymore, right? Sometimes you might want to use a check to get out of pins. For example, and this is especially true in the case of an absolute value pin, right? So let us say that I'm looking for this guy here, and bishop is over here. Guess what? My rook is pinned, right? How do I get out of a pin? By giving a check. Giving a check is usually the easiest way of getting out of a pin. Giving a check is usually the easiest easiest way of getting out of a pin. Now, in this particular move, you should take some pictures of these because I can't remember these again. In this particular case, if you've already done your discovers, then there's a better move, and that is to go give a check with your rook. And what do you call this move?
Double attack discovery.
This is a double attack discovery. You're attacking with the front piece, and you're unleashing an attack from the piece in the back. So you've actually done a double attack discovery. So you have all these options open. You have all these options open when you have a pinned piece. To get a pinned piece out, the easiest way is to check the king or attack a bigger piece. Why are we checking the king? Because the king is the biggest piece of them all. But just maybe an easier move would be let's say that you were in the back there, and or let's say that I want to keep my queen out here. I was just going to show you that another way would be if there was a queen or some other piece here. I can get him out of the pin by attacking him. So now I attack a bigger piece, not just a king, and that's still okay too. Right. So the key to understand is by attacking a bigger piece, you can get out of a pin, because now he wouldn't capture that because he would want to save the bigger piece. Sometimes you have a case where you can pin the pinner, and we have seen the case where you can pin the pinner. So you have a king there, you have a king here, and I gave you a check. I'm still searching for my queen, black queen. I give a check, and you can pin the pinner. So there you go. I'm pinning the pinner right here. And then I go. Oh, sorry. So you have, your notes have a lot more pieces, but these get you the fewest pieces possible, right? Pinning the pinner in the board, you have, in the notes you have so many pieces out there, but you can just talk about the same thing with this. And this is not an interesting class. It's going to be a little boring, because there's lots of scenarios to talk about, and the kids are only taking it all in. And there's not many questions. If you've seen, this was the least engaging class with the students too. So you want to make sure that you get that somehow. And that's pretty much it. That is all we have about pins.